Hello Total War fans, this is Sons of Three Kingdom back with part 18 of my Cao Cao Let's Play. Apologies, this video is going to be a little weird because when I played through this and casted it, I was a complete idiot. I was probably also drunk and my microphone was just not on at all. So I am actually laying down the audio track now separately whilst watching the video. So at the start of this, we are still at war with the Kingdom of Shu-Han. We still don't really know what's happening. It's a many-fronted, three-fronted war. And, yeah, we were just trying to figure out how it's going. I guess without me being so distracted by, needing to play the game, I can talk maybe about more historical and game elements, if any, occur. But yeah, at this point, we were basically trying to... We knew that we could, because we had won quite a few battles with, Shu-Han. Okay, well, you know what? I'm going to go first. I'm going to go through this first. Yuan Tan is historically the eldest son of Yuan Shao, so in this game, obviously, after Yuan Shao died, he took over. Realistically, in history, after Yuan Shao died, Yuan Tan was his eldest son, but his favorite son was actually his youngest son, Yuan Shang, I believe that's the guy's name. And the two of them actually started a civil war within the Yuan family, and everybody took sides, and the entirety of North China was kind of this smaller civil war within, the larger civil war within China. And Cao Cao actually used this civil war to great effect. I rejected this marriage because there was just nothing in it to me. So Cao Cao scored a huge victory of Yuan Shao. Yuan Shao then died about a year later, and... yeah, we have no way to defend this, I believe. Did we try to fight this battle? I can't actually remember. So yeah, the Duchy of Wu has now joined this war. But anyway, so Cao Cao took advantage of the bickering between Yuan Shao's children and essentially united the North by defeating all of them in piecemeal. Oh, we did try to fight this battle, I see. So this was a pretty bad point for us. We were hoping we entered this war and kind of continued it under the assumption that Sun Ce would not join, or at the very least, if he does join, he might join on our side, because he had earlier agreed that if he was to rebel against Shu-Han, which is his vassal overlord in this case, then we would have supported his independence. Unfortunately, he didn't do that. He's a goddamn coward and a fool, and now he's attacking us on this kind of like undefended front. And the thing about this war was, if it was just against Shu-Han and most of their smaller vassals, even though they were stronger than us, we could beat them just by, I guess winning on the battlefield again and again, as we had. But once Sun Ce had joined the war and attacked us, we knew that that wasn't going to be the case. So this campaign has ended up mirroring history a bit, not a lot, but a bit, in the fact that Liu Bei, that is the Kingdom of Shu-Han, us and Sun Ce, we are the three big powers now left. And a lot of the dynamics of the later three kingdoms is that if two of the kingdoms united against the third one had a really tough time. So that's essentially what's happening to us now. We're one of the three preeminent powers. Liu Bei is one of the other three, and then Sun Ce is the third. And we could probably face Liu Bei one-on-one, but with Sun Ce, it would become a lot more difficult. The commander of Sun Ce's forces in this game, Jianyue, that is not a historical character, so unfortunately nothing else we can really say about this. And actually, this settlement, the fact that they were taking this settlement would be a huge problem for us, because we just don't really have, like, this settlement is a huge source of food. Something like 12 food or something just from this settlement alone. And it would obviously, if we lose this, it'll drive us into a food crisis. But, it's just... holding against proper full stack armies with just the garrison is very, very difficult. especially considering our garrison, you know, we don't have swords, we don't have cavalry. yeah, the quality of the troops aren't very good. Normally, obviously, we rock archer, like normally for range troops we rock archers and crossbows, but in this case most of our archers are actually archer militias, which have a shorter range. So we just went for the strategy of, you know, just trying to hold choke points and delay them as we could. I think something I preferred in Warhammer and Warhammer 2 over this game is that in Warhammer and Warhammer 2 you could actually build wars in your minor settlements, you know, if it was really need be. But here there's very little way to defend these like relatively isolated minor settlements that are nonetheless quite important for you. I mean, you can't really afford to keep an army there. So yeah, our overall plan was just to hold the 2 choke points, archers in behind, try to deal damage to them, and then and here I just trying to see if I can deploy the archer up on the hill. Unfortunately, they don't let you do that. And that was one of the good things about the earlier Total Wars. I mean, if this was Rome or Medieval 2, you could have just deployed things wherever. Doesn't matter if it broke the game or not. What I haven't done much is break down, I guess, how each unit fitted within historical China. There's not, I think, so much to break down. I think I've explained before that even though China invented the crossbow and widely used the crossbow for a long time, that was more kind of for ease of use. It wasn't like in... I mean, it kind of was for ease of use in Europe as well. You could train a guy on a crossbow quite, you know, quickly. But, you know, China didn't have to deal with the problem of so many kind of armored knights dominating the battlefield. So having a faster rate of fire and more accuracy, like trained archers could, was still, at the end of the day, more important than crossbows. So crossbows were commonly used, but they never took the preeminence of archers. Even though the crossbows, you know, they were great at innovating crossbows. They had repeating crossbows. They had these things called cluster crossbows. You know, crossbows as sidearms, crossbows on horseback used kind of like as dragoons, where the horses give them more mobility and elevated fire. But they, you know, at the end of the day, the bow, if you have time to train your troops, just a more versatile weapon in these circumstances. So that's kind of the history of the bow versus the crossbow in China. And it was unfortunately at this point that I realized that they can actually burn our towers down. I was trying to hold these places, choke points, to, you know, make full use of our towers, but then I realized, oh, they can just burn our towers down. This is less useful now. And I made a mistake there. I really should have tried to return fire with my archers. I think I kind of forgot that yeah, so I kind of forgot that that was a thing. And I mean, they had archers and they were outranging our archer militias. But nonetheless, at this point, I decided, okay, if they're going to burn our towers down, there's no point holding these choke points. So, you know, the decision was made to kind of focus upon this middle ground. Probably lost quite a few men here just from these repeated volleys in the back. Not ideal. But coming into this battle, I didn't know I was going to lose it. I realized I was going to lose it when, you know, there weren't wars in the settlements, and I think we're just trying to go for just inflicting damage, I guess. Now, in terms of the two types of spearmen we see, because we see both spearmen and we see Ji warriors. Jis were a very old weapon in China. They were commonly used during the Zhou dynasty, which is, you know, like over 1,000. Sorry, I'm trying to remember that. It's like 1,000 BC to 200 BC, so it's quite early. Yeah, they were quite commonly used. And obviously the point is that extra kind of point at the end of them allowed it to be used as an axe as well. So you could use that as a spear, you could use that as an axe, you can mass them up quite easily, they're quite cheap to produce. So they were a weapon in vogue for a long time. The thing that would be inaccurate about, but frankly, this is inaccurate of most of the other Total Wars as well. The idea of having units of swordsmen, this is not something that really would have happened. Realistically, swords were the tools of, you know, officers, kind of more well-off men, warriors and such. They weren't deployed in mass formations like this. That was the case for Europe, and it is the case in ancient China. However, in ancient China, the one thing they had was, they had these weapons called daos. The way to think about a dao is, think of them as a scimitar. I think that's the closest. It's halfway between a scimitar and an axe, let's say. And daos were actually used as a standard weapon, alongside spears and jis. So, yeah, they were obviously much more close quarters, but, you know, they were used as a mass weapon, unlike swords, which were incredibly kind of expensive to produce and also difficult to use. With a dao, you could just hack away like you would an axe. Or a scimitar, I guess. Sabers? Yeah, that's probably the correct word. Sabers. I don't know why it took me that long to find that word. And you could have a short dao, which is kind of held using one hand, or you could have a long dao, which would act almost kind of a polearm. That was very favored by a lot of cavalry. A lot of cavalry could have long chang dao, long daos, really, and that would allow you to, you know, act halfway between kind of like a sword cavalry and a polearm cavalry. But actually, and I've made this historical grievance before, the use of horse archers, both as actual cavalry archers and as dragoons, were quite prevalent in China, and this is a lot because of how much they had to deal with steppe nomads, essentially. And that's something that's been basically largely missing from this game. I think they kind of leaned in more to the more exotic kind of like, you know, Wuxing, Taoist, 5 elements. Yeah, okay, yeah, I get it, sure, but yeah, they don't really get the Chinese use of horse archers here. Now here, obviously, we're in trouble because one of our ranks is kind of broken, and it threatens our whole core of archers. But realistically, we're just never going to be able to beat any of these ranks in melee. And there's also a problem without officers. The morale of these garrison troops are just quite bad, really. Yeah, so I believe every time you see like saber infantry in this game, that's dao. But sometimes you see like, you know, what's called like jian. Jian is a Chinese word for sword, and dao is a Chinese word for well, this saber thing, I guess. So the saber infantries, you know, they would have happened in history, but the entire idea of like jian's guard infantry or jian's like horsemen, that just would not have occurred. I mean, you don't want to wield like a short sword on a horse anyway, not really, as your primary weapon. So yeah.
Bowman, stand ready. Arrow, the time has come. Bows.
The other, I mean, really great inaccuracy is the idea that these minor settlements would be not unwalled. I mean, China had so many walled cities, just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of walled cities. Certainly, the most important towns in each commandery, the 3 or 4 most important towns of each commandery, which are what these, you know, kind of minor settlements are meant to show, those would have been walled. They wouldn't necessarily have been big walls, but, you know, walled cities were very, very common in China. The, I guess the capitals of the commandery, they'd have walls they'd have, you know, walls that were quite high and thick. So for example, the city of Xiangyang, which is an ancient city, it still exists today, it's still bustling today, you know, probably like 5 to 10 million people live there or something. And it was one of the most difficult cities the Mongols ever took. It's one of the longest sieges in the world. The siege of Xiangyang lasted for 7 years, I believe, 6 or 7 years. So Xiangyang that would be an example of a relatively heavily fortified city. It had double walls. The double walls were, you know, 6 to 7 meters thick. So just to give you an idea of how insanely fortified a lot of these cities were. And actually, if you have the fortune to kind of... Alright, so here we see a problem where our lack of commanders is really becoming a problem because their officers have started to break through and just started taking on large swords of our archers, making them a lot less effective. We've managed to inflict a good deal of casualties in this battle. Like, I really wasn't too unhappy with the amount of casualties we inflicted. But the problem is that there was just no strategic follow-up. Like, this town was out of the way. We were hoping in our heart that Sun Ce wouldn't go to war with us. So even though we severely bloody their... I mean, we're going to lose this battle, but even though we severely bloody this enemy, we're not going to be really able to capitalize on it on any way, unfortunately. Aside from, I guess, slowing down the time they took to recover and take their next town. So yeah, anyway, as I was going back to it, if you want to see a really... There's a few cities in China that have either intact versions of their old walls and fortifications, or have rebuilt them. Probably the most famous one is Xi'an in the northwest. Xi'an is the modern name and also the ancient name for the city of Chang'an in this game, and Chang'an is the western capital. As I've said before, the Han Dynasty at this point had 2 capitals, the western capital and the eastern capital. It wasn't really a Roman Constantinople situation. It was just, you know, the emperor could set up court at different places depending on as necessary. They weren't ruled by separate emperors or anything. So Chang'an is the modern city of Xi'an. If you go there now, you can still see, like, the city walls are completely repaired. They were largely maintained and completely repaired. Kind of really nice. You can cycle on top of them. As I said, they're 6 to 7 meters wide, so they were meant to hold thousands of men for defense. So yeah, you can cycle on top of them. You can chill out. You can go to restaurants or whatever. Yeah, it's kind of nice. And then unfortunately in Beijing. Sorry, when I speak in English, I drift into this weird English accent for Chinese, but yeah, in Beijing you can see, I guess, the remnants of the outer walls. The various gates are really, which are, you know, to call them gates is a bit. They're more like gatehouses or fortresses. They're quite big and imposing. You can still see them around.
Our men flee the battlefield.
Yeah, this battle's over. So yeah, like their European counterparts in castles, or actually like Byzantium, I guess, like Constantinople. Usually the bigger cities would have 2 layers of walls for an inner city and an outer city. So when the Mongols were attacking China, a lot of problems they found was that the Chinese would intentionally abandon the outer layers, or feign an abandonment, draw the Mongols in, and then spring their ambush from 4 sides. Towers, overlapping towers, fields of fire, battlements, and basically just like slaughter the Mongols to a man. And I mean, the Mongol conquest of China, it's I don't know if there's any really good English sources for it, but it was brutal, just the amount of sheer death and destruction on both sides. Obviously more on the Chinese side in terms of civilians. It's something like 30 million civilians killed, which represented a good portion of the world's population back then. But the military tactics used were absolutely fascinating. So yep, we lost this battle, gave a good account of ourselves. Unfortunately, as I said, there's no strategic follow-up. I think I was trying to highlight there how ineffective their cavalry was. And yep, that's where we caused the most damage. Absolutely. But yeah, you see the problem. Look at those saber and swordsmen with kind of like 122 kills, 80 kills, 66 kills. I mean, that's really the problem. Those are direct counters to our spears, and we really didn't have an answer for them. See, and this is the point where I started despairing. I realized, oh, this isn't even an isolated land grab. They moved another army up with led by Sun Ren, who is meant to be Sun Ce's youngest sister. We don't actually know her name, I think, in history. Yeah, in history they just called her Lady Sun. But yeah, Sun Ce's youngest sister, who later plays kind of a big role politically. Obviously never led any military units, was not a commander. There were no, as far as we kind of know, there were no female commanders in the Three Kingdoms era. It did happen in other parts of China, obviously Mulan being the biggest example. But during the Three Kingdoms era, not a lot of known female commanders, but obviously the women played a huge role in the politics and the administration, because so much of this was family-based politics as well. With social order breaking down, the women had to step up loud and often, and especially in the Sun family, where the patriarchs of the family just kept dying. I mean, Sun Jian died. Historically, Sun Ce died not long after Sun Jian. So the women of the Sun family were really quite important to ensuring their success and rise. And on Cao Cao's side, Lady Bian was also, because Cao Cao was away on campaigning so often, so Lady Bian, also needed to keep the home base intact. Although, as I said, the main Cao Cao's chief strategist, Xun Yu, who I'm really sad to see hasn't showed up in this game. He's one of my favorite characters in Three Kingdoms. Xun Yu was more in charge of keeping Cao Cao's home base together. Yeah. So we had managed to negotiate a peace with Kong Rong. That's why his armies are reporting. But we're obviously still dealing with these armies here on the Western Front. There's like 3 full stack Han armies, and at this point, I had a huge problem where our food crisis was starting to get really bad. It's at -8 now. It's only going to get worse. And there were just too many enemy armies, and we didn't... Yeah, this was a great one. We caught them on the river. And obviously destroy them. Liu Yan, as far as I'm aware, not a real historical... this Liu Yan anyway, not a real historical character. We decided to execute them because I think at this point I was just trying to thin out Shu-Han's ranks as much as possible. But even though we were winning basically every battle on the field, we just... you'll see in a while that all of our regions are just completely in revolt. Yeah, we destroyed this. Realistically, I don't know if this was something that ever happened. So... yeah, I think we executed this guy as well. So what I meant, I'm not sure ever happened historically, is these naval battles on the Yellow River. To my knowledge, there's not really been that many famous battles in the Yellow River. The Yellow River's kind of really rapid and just not very deep and wide. It's actually quite big, but it's not it's really rapid, and it's kind of just, I think, odd in terms of currents and depth, etc. So historically, there was not many naval battles on the Yellow River. There were some engagements in terms of like people trying to ford the river and such. You can Google image search the Yellow River. It really is a massive river. Historically, most naval battles would happen, you know, where I'm zooming over in the south now, the Yangtze River. The Yangtze River is huge. You could have gigantic battles, I mean, and many people did, including during the Three Kingdoms era. You could have gigantic battles with hundreds of ships on the Yangtze River. Yeah, I think at this point, we realized that we're not going to be able to win a war simultaneously against Shu-Han and Sun Ce, so I think we were trying to negotiate a peace with him. And because we had won so many battles, we knew it could be a pretty good peace. So our priority at this point was, I think I was trying to do some territory swaps with them. Because, yeah, look at those, I mean, yeah, look at those public orders, like minus 99 and minus 21, minus 49 and minus 21 per turn. It was quite intense. And the thought in my mind is, well, maybe I can get rid of some of the more problematic territories in favor of territories that are closer and easier to control. Because their entire southern flank folded, southwestern flank really, I mean south central flank, this more accurately, this area where over now, Jiangling, Xiangyang, they really folded very quickly here, and we just ended up with too much territory. We can't really meaningfully hold them, and we expanded too quickly, and now we have very little food. Any lowering of the tax rate or exemption of taxes will make our food crisis much worse. So yeah, at this point I wasn't really sure how to proceed with this. See, the problem is, yeah, when I tax exempt this Jiangling, it took us from minus 8 to minus 16 food instantly. And I think I was at this point scouting around for what would be an appropriate territory trade. I knew that we wanted to probably trade away Donghai because we had lost the port in the last turn, which would make Donghai just the city and difficult to feed and to drain on food. I knew that we wanted Pengcheng to complete that commandery of Pengcheng. Yeah, so you can see me mousing over them now. Trade Donghai for Pengcheng. But the problem is that that's not an even trade. We're trading one minor settlement for a major settlement. So I also wanted to get something else out of it. And I think at this point I was trying to just find the second thing. And I believe I was favoring trying to take the city of Jiangling. The problem with taking the city of Jiangling, however, is that it would just give us another... Jiangling had such low public order. I mean, it was at minus 99. And getting that city would just... I don't know how much it would exacerbate things in the short term. I mean, Liu Bei's weakness right now is really obvious. He's got so many land and so many armies. But the problem is that he's divided on 3 fronts. I mean, it does make it hard for us as well because we have to fight on 3 fronts. But yeah, there was no way for him to actually concentrate his forces effectively. Yeah. I don't even know what I was trying to do here. I thought I was just literally trying to figure out how this land swap would work. Still figuring it out, obviously. I don't know. A word on geography. I've said before that... Oh, let's see what I decided with the land swap. Yeah, I've been on a business trip for the last week. It's been a long time since I've actually touched this game. All I know is that I recorded 2 episodes with no audio and went, oh crap, well now I have to leave for this trip, and yeah, I barely remember what happened, if I'm going to be honest. So yeah, and I think at this point I was probably a few wines in and being an idiot and not realizing how to like literally physically get to the all I needed to do was click that arrow, but I just like couldn't figure it out. There we go. You fucking idiot. So yeah, we're gonna get Jiangling off of them. Yes? No? And then in return, we also wanted Pengcheng. That would that's the one I really wanted. That would complete the commandery. And then I think in return we were gonna give them the city of Donghai. Yeah, there we go. Without that fishing pole, that city is just a drain on food. And obviously that ended up being quite a good deal, so we wanted, you know, some more things. Trying to work out getting some food to kind of stave off our kind of famine right now. Then realizing I selected the wrong faction, and then selecting the correct faction. And hooray! We won our first war against the Kingdom of Shu-Han. It was not bad. We lost, you know, we lost 2 settlements. We gained, let's see, Xiangyang, there's 2, Jiangling is 2, Pengcheng is, yeah, we gained 7 settlements for 2. It's like really not bad, yeah. And at this point, you know, that was an insane couple of turns. I was just trying to figure out what to do next. A word on the geography, we've entirely been finding in the most populated part of China, but absolutely a very small part of China. So this entire region between the Yellow and Yangtze River, which we've been fighting, that's known as the Central Plains. I mean, yeah. This game is going to go on for a long time, unfortunately. I'm obviously not going to, you know, end it until... what was I trying to do here? Oh yeah, I was trying to go to peace with Sun Ce because that was stupid.
Greetings.
The Duchy of Zhong, that is Yuan Shu's family, also, you know, kind of matched history in terms of how things went for them, although completely in the wrong geography. They got too powerful too early on, declared they had imperial ambitions, that everybody just promptly turned them down. Actually, in history, the 2 big factors that led to the Duchy of Zhong's destruction was, firstly, Sun Ce just refused to support them. So Sun Ce was actually technically their vassal, but Sun Ce refused to support them, and then Cao Cao took them down. Like, Cao Cao basically took them down single-handedly. But certainly they were very isolated. And the one big historical anomaly here is that Yuan Shao did not really rise. Yeah, historically, you know, before the rise of Cao Cao, Liu Bei, and the Sun family, the 2 big powers were Yuan Shao and Yuan Shu, the 2 brothers. Just doing some boring admin. Yeah, I mean, look at that public order. That is insane.
Law must rule.
The other problem we're facing, which I guess took me a while to deal with, I think, is that if we weren't at war with Liu Bei, we are kind of over-militarized right now. We have 7 full stacks, and it's just quite a lot in terms of upkeep. We weren't really getting any extra money in the short term. I mean, we have a healthy bank, but our income is in the negative. So we need to disband one of the armies. Cannot remember really when exactly I did that, but yeah, we needed to disband one of the armies. And at this point, I was just really trying to strategically place my armies in places with really low public order. I mean, I was really just trying to deal with public order here.
Lucky I acknowledge you.
And trying to make a peace deal here. Yes, at this point I was willing to give up Jianye because it was just, again, it was a huge food drain. Wasn't really offering much to us strategically. And I believe I wanted the fishing port back. But I don't think he went for it because we haven't inflicted any victories over him. Oh, okay. And now I was regretting knowing that he's taking this deal. I am now regretting giving up the city of Donghai because we could have had a complete commandery. So yeah, I ended up not going for it. And yeah, sorry, no, I know this isn't interesting to watch. It's just me pondering how to deal with the public order problem. I lean pretty heavily into Confucian temples and solving my food problem. Now, this game is obviously progressing much slower than history. Historically, by 217, really the entire Three Kingdoms has been set. So the Three Kingdoms was kind of... There was, I guess, roughly 3 phases. The first one from about 190 to, let's say, about 208 or 210, maybe. That was when it was properly in a what you would call a warlord era, with mostly Cao Cao dominating everything and kind of growing bigger and bigger. And then in 208 there was the famous Battle of Red Cliffs, which marks kind of the high watermark of Cao Cao's expansion south. He was defeated by an alliance of Liu Bei and Sun Quan. Sun Quan is Sun Ce's younger brother who takes over after Liu Bei dies. And then from kind of about 208 afterwards, there was a period of stalemates. I mean, there were still many very famous campaigns that happened, but essentially it became clear that these 3 factions would be the 3 biggest factions in China. And later Cao Cao would die. Cao Cao refused to usurp the throne. So later Cao Cao would die. He would... his son, Cao Pi, would end up usurping the throne and declaring himself emperor. Now, in response to Cao Pi declaring himself emperor, Liu Bei also declared himself emperor as the legitimate successor of the Han. And a few years after that, Sun Quan declared himself emperor as well. So, and then you had the titular Three Kingdoms. And that kind of the struggle between these three kingdoms went from, you know, about 220 to about 260 something AD, and then during the around 260 something AD,
Your choice.
yeah, I believe we rejected this. Yeah, around 260 something AD, the kingdom of Shu-Han, that is Liu Bei's kingdom, who basically spent 40 years waging endless war against the kingdom of Wei, because their entire raison d'etre was that they were the legitimate successors of the Han, the Wei were usurpers, the Cao family were usurpers. But the problem was that they were much smaller, like much smaller, less than 1/4 of the people. Hang on, let me think about this. They had 900,000 people by the time they fell. Wei had 4.5 million in terms of population. So yeah, because they did do censuses after a while, and so yeah, they had about 1/5 of the people, far less armies, far less economy, etc. And they were waging a 20-year-long offensive war. No, not 20-year-long, sorry, 40-year-long offensive war, and it basically just made them into this like really weird, hollowed-out warlord state. And that's one of the weird things about history, is that they are ultimately seen as a protagonist, the kingdom of Shu-Han. But yeah, you would if you were like a person living in any of these kingdoms, you would much prefer to live in Wei, which was the antagonist, because like seen traditionally as the antagonist, because Wei just had, it was a properly functioning kingdom. Shu-Han was just this aggressive, hollowed out warlord state where every single aspect of the kingdom was used to wage these horrible offensive wars that got nowhere. The eventual census they took of Shu-Han, the population was 900,000, but the military forces accounted for 90,000, which means 10% of the entire kingdom was drafted in war. So yeah, it was quite a, in many senses, it was a very austere and Spartan existence. We know about that because if you go to the modern city of Chengdu in southwestern China, you can still see their, temples and a lot of those things. It's just nowhere near as grand. It's for Imperial Chinese dynasty. So yeah, by the 260s, the Shu-Han was pretty much spent, and Wei decided that they were finally sick of all these attacks and just kind of crushed them in one overwhelming attack, and yeah, that's it. This is when we get rid of a army, our least kind of effective army anyway, just to relieve some of our treasury, because we know we need to invest more in buildings. So yeah, by 260 something, the Shu-Han fell to a Wei invasion, and then by this point all the original characters have long died, obviously, and even their children had died. After that, Wei underwent a coup d'etat. So there was a lot of poetic justice in this, because the Cao family overthrew the imperial family, the imperial house of Liu, and usurped Han, and established their own dynasty of Wei. But then their biggest family, the Simas, actually overthrew them within about 3 years, and established the dynasty of Jin. Sorry, it's pronounced Jin. So that was the end of Wei. So Shu-Han got invaded, Wei got usurped, and then Jin at that point controlled 90% of China really. So they just took over Wu without much of a problem. Invaded across the Yangtze, defeated them in pretty short order, and Jin was said to have united China. So that's how, funnily enough, none of the three kingdoms actually won. But again, here there is kind of a parallel to Sengoku Jidai. I mean, like the Japanese game studios often, and people often love making these comparisons, because yeah, they were kind of similar. And the parallel here to Sengoku Jidai is that even though none of these three kingdoms won, the eventual winner, the Jin dynasty under the House of Sima, they really, by usurping Wei, they had actually taken on Wei's legacy. And the eventual force that won was the Wei army, the Wei economy, and the Wei state won. So it was very similar to how the Tokugawas won by usurping the like Hideyoshi and Oda. So yeah, in a sense, Wei won, but in a broader sense, obviously all of them lost. Yeah. So at this point, I believe, yeah, I was trying to entice Kong Rong into joining me. At this point, that's still quite a high cost, so I've gone against it. And just to give you an idea of the kind of devastation that these 90 years of war eventually caused, the Han Dynasty at its height had a population of 50 million, and the Jin Dynasty at the very start had a population of about 10 million. And of that 10 million, essentially 6 million came from the former lands of Wei, 3 million came from the lands of Wu, and 1 million came from the lands of Shu-Han. So the population from the height of the Han Dynasty to the beginning of the Jin Dynasty, which is about 100 years apart, the population decreased by 5-folds. And obviously that doesn't mean 80% of the population was killed off, far from it. But obviously population growth slows to a crawl. People stop having more children when they're just desperate refugees. A lot of, just like a lot of infrastructure broke down, right? I think right now I am talking about how Cao Chong, who is somebody who's just been given birth, there was actually a historical person named Cao Chong. He was Cao Cao's favorite son, not Cao Pi's son. He was meant to be just incredibly clever. There was a few kind of like records about him, and the records are, I don't know how much they're to be trusted, but if one of them is to be believed, he kind of like at the age of 12 invented the Archimedes scale independently. So I mean, that would be really impressive if it was true, but we don't know. But he died when he was 13 of a sickness. So yeah, going back, it's not that the 80% of the empire was killed off. It's just that obviously when you have a collapse of infrastructure, food supply, administration, census, etc., 80% of the population, might disappear across 100 years by lowering birth rates, emigration. A lot of people, the geographic boundaries of the overall polity that is the Chinese Empire shrank a lot during these 100 years. So there was a lot of people who might now no longer live under the kind of jurisdictions of the empire, especially in the northwest, in the far north, and to a smaller degree than the south. And also just when you have such a huge disruption, it's not necessarily that all these people have been killed off. They might just escape under because urbanization will decrease, and they kind of just escape under the radar of the census office. Because obviously, if you can, you try to not get noticed by the census office, because the census office is used for things like taxation. So, if you were able to go about not being found out by them, then that was great, because it didn't pay tax. So yeah, that really explains kind of the population decrease. But nonetheless, regardless, you can still see just how devastating it was that the population, for reasons of war as well as for non-violent reasons, shrank by about 80% across 100 years. Yeah, I think right now I want to make more money on these settlements, but I just have to double down on building more Confucian temples in order to get public order back up. The absolute most mind-boggling element of this map so far is that the city of Xuchang does not exist on this map. Xuchang was the Cao Cao's capital, and it's crazy to me that they just wouldn't include that. I don't really know. Like, the map is fine, it's pretty good even, but the fact that that city does not exist is very, very strange. I don't really know how to explain it. Man, Dong Zhao looks so happy. I guess he has reason to be happy. In history, he ended up doing pretty well. He was never one of Cao Cao's top advisors in history, but he always kept himself on the good side. He was relatively capable, and he eventually had a lot. He had a lot to do with actually the usurpation of Wei over Han. Eventually, he was like, there were people at court who maybe wanted to keep the Han and just have the Cao family in charge, de facto sense, but they wanted to keep the Han. And then there were people who really wanted the Wei to just the Cao family to usurp it and get it over with already. And Dong Zhao was a big part of that faction who was trying to argue for usurpation, and yeah.
Very well.
Gongsun Zan lasting a lot longer in this game than he did in history. In history, he was killed off by about 198, 200, somewhere around then. So about 20 years ago in game terms. He essentially fought a series of campaigns against Yuan Shao, lost more and more, and I believe he eventually, when he was holed up in his last city, and the city was about to fall, he committed suicide along with his family, and then had his court burned to the ground. It was quite brutal. But Gongsun Zan was also meant to be quite a brutal man. I have no idea what I was trying to do here. I think I might have been talking about what the strategies would be for a second war with Shu-Han, because obviously our grudge against Shu-Han is not over. And, well, what we would ideally want to do is lock off the other flanks, not have the Duchy of Wu, that is Sun Ce, invade us, and then we finish off his pocket in the northeast. But it's much easier said than done. The pocket in the northeast is quite big. It's actually it's quite a few cities. Yeah. So these few turns were really annoying to play. It was just a range of managing tax exemptions and constructions and garrisoning armies in different cities on each turn just to keep public order down a bit. Yeah. Apologies again, everybody, for losing the audio on this. This is not my preferred method of playing, to just kind of talk a week later after I've already played these turns, wondering what the hell I was doing. And I am sorry to say that there's another part after this that also will just be in the same format, as in we don't have audio, so I'm just going to have to lay it over. You can see how unwieldy our land is. I mean, Shu-Han has it even worse than us, but everybody else has like relatively wieldy territories, and it's very difficult for us to reinforce anywhere without using redeployment, which is obviously quite expensive. We border too many people, and that's something that Cao Cao managed to avoid in history. He was always quite good at really focusing down on his fronts. God, I don't even know what we're trying to do here. I was at this point interested in making Kongrong a vassal. I knew that was the case because I just wanted to not have him join a war again when we inevitably go to war with Shu-Han. But yeah, I think right now I'm motioning the various fronts. So as I said, the front in the top, that is the one we have to take in our next war against Shu-Han. And yeah, we are almost to the rank of king. I do like the mechanics of this game, where the first 3 sides who declare themselves king will become emperors, rivaling emperors. Historically, you know, as I said, Cao Cao's son, second son, was the first one to declare himself emperor, followed by Liu Bei, followed by Sun Quan. But there was a gap between Liu Bei and Sun Quan. Okay, that's it. Apologies for the kind of incoherent and often disjointed recordings. This is Sons of Three Kingdom, and I am signing off. See ya.